We're on.
Yeah, good morning. It's Monday, July 30th, and this is a continuation of Board of Selectmen meeting. We earlier had a non-public session, and we're now back in public session. Let me begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Do we have any public input before we get going on appointments and other things? All right. Seeing none, the first item we have is review and approval of the minutes from July 23rd.
I have nothing.
I didn't see anything either.
Also,
All right.
Excuse me, Bill.
I'm sorry.
There was a little handwritten note.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Does everybody have that?
No, sorry, I just put it on yours.
All right. All right. There is one correction on the second page. Toward the end of the first big paragraph, there was reference to the current holding tank as being faulty, and the word faulty should be deleted from that sentence.
So,
What are you talking about?
yeah, I see it. I'm just wondering how you, okay, Mr. Bean shared additional concerns regarding use of town property, including high use of the property as well as concerns with future ongoing issues.
I guess because it's
I think you
debatable
gotta
whether
end
or
at
not.
issues, because the rest of it's all about the fault tank. So, are you with me, Karen?
The future ongoing issues he was concerned about was just the fact that even though they're gonna replace the tank, what about other issues that might have been caused from the current
Right,
holding
but
tank? So that's what that ongoing was, but
Right, but
I guess the
I think,
concern is
I agree with you,
faulty.
just strike it,
Right.
ending at issues. That includes
okay,
And
things other than the tank.
so ending at issues, okay.
Right.
Thank you.
It was defunct, right?
No.
I don't know what that's proof,
The
I
old
guess.
holding tank?
No.
The old,
I don't think it's
The old one?
the old tank is functional,
Yeah.
right.
Oh,
okay?
But they are gonna replace it.
But they're,
they're gonna replace it, it's kind of moot.
But
because
that-
they're gonna-
just-
so, right, their contention was that it was failed.
There's no mandate from the state.
Oh, that was
or-
Bean's contention.
Right,
Right.
Okay.
right. But there's no direct evidence that it was failed.
Oh, okay.
So, anyway.
I'll move we accept the minutes as edited.
Second. All in favor? All right, motion carries. And we'll move on to landfill preliminary hydrogeologic study.
Say that 3 times fast.
Can we do
Yeah,
an
right.
acronym?
Really? Morning, Dave, how are you?
I'm good this morning. How are all of you?
LPHS.
Not bad.
I think Don just stepped up to go to the bathroom.
Okay.
Long driving from Maine this morning,
Yeah,
and he goes down.
too many cups of coffee, right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Excuse me, in the correspondence, isn't there a copy of the suggested?
In the purple one.
I think it is right here. Yep.
I have other copies too, if anybody.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Sure.
Do you need one?
I've already read that.
Okay.
Yep.
You have an extra one there?
So when we last met, we had talked about how do we get our arms around potential contamination, what's going on out there, and this proposal is to do some investigative work, study, whatever. Why don't you
Yeah,
tell us about that?
based on our last conversation, with the folks from the CONSCOM. My understanding, the primary concerns, I mean, we all know that there's some level of impact from the landfill and groundwater quality, which is basically very similar to what Don and I see at many other landfills. But the particular issue of concern at Tuftonboro is that you have this aquifer, this mapped aquifer in very close proximity, and although it may not be tapped at the present time as a potential municipal source, there is some concern that if it would be, there could be potential impacts from the landfill which would hinder that. So my taking out from that last meeting, what I relate to Don, was that we wanted to come up with some type of preliminary investigation that focused on trying to determine what the impacts specifically to that aquifer would be. With the understanding that the town's already gone through your budget process for this year, there's not unlimited funds to do this. We didn't talk about exactly what the town may be able or willing to spend for this, but I told Don that we need to be reasonable in what we're proposing and not come up with something in the six-figure range. I don't know where that number eventually falls, but that's a starting point, I think, to get us towards that goal of figuring out what's happening to the aquifer itself. So Don and his crew were primarily responsible for putting that together. I would defer to him if you have any specific questions about what's proposed, why it's being proposed, and what we hope to get out of it.
Okay, Don?
Yes. First of all, I apologize for being late.
Hey, not a problem.
The Spalding Turnpike is continually beats me up. I live in Kittery, so
Yeah.
coming up that way was a little longer. What I have here is some visual aids, a few maps that have been generated. I have another one I think I was interested. This first map was developed by the U.S. Geological Survey, and it's the sand and gravel aquifers in the Winnipesaukee River watershed. And this is one of 4 maps that entail that entire area. The northern portion is the aquifer that we're talking about. It's identified as the Melvin River aquifer. And in this line of work, they divide these aquifers up in color codes. The lighter blue is a transmissivity of about 2,000 per day. The darker blues are mapped as more transmissive portions of the aquifer. And that could be a function of the type of soil grains, marbles and sand versus larger size tennis balls, larger gravels. Or it could be a function of the thickness of the aquifer. It could be the deep end of the pool. And on this first map, this USGS, I tried to superimpose the landfill. It's in that little red circle right on the corner of that dark blue.
Okay.
And then down below that, I tried to just highlight where the Great Meadow area is, town-owned property. So that shows, from a geological standpoint, where the aquifer is located. The second map was developed by the DES GIS system, and it shows property lines, the road. The landfill is pretty much smack dab in the middle, and then down on the bottom left, in that pink and purplish area, is again the Great Meadow area. And then the third map, what I tried to do on GIS is superimpose the aquifer on top, but it kind of obliterates all the aerial photography and things like that. But you get an idea of where the aquifer is. 2 big concepts of this line of work is the natural aspect of things, the aquifer is where it is, from the melting of the glacier. And then you have the human side of things, property boundaries, access issues, the DES regulations and things like that. So it's always kind of nice to refer to these going back and forth. But in the vicinity of the landfill on the east side, we have that darker blue, a higher transmissive aquifer, or portion of the aquifer. But then when we look at the property boundaries, we see that there's a lot of small lots, things like that. The reason why the property boundaries is important is, from the DES standpoint, and again, all these concepts are related to a well pumping water out. And one of the first things the DES is going to want to see is a 400-foot radius around the well. That's the sanitary radius. And it's all about land use and keeping away potential sources of contamination, underground fuel tanks, herbicide, pesticide applications and things like that. And so ideally, a 400-foot radius falls under the town-owned property. That way you just have to deal with yourselves. If that 400-foot radius goes around and a portion of it extends on your neighbor's property, and if he's a reasonable neighbor, then you just have to deal with him about property use. If he's not a reasonable neighbor, then you have that headache. And I can tell you stories about NIMBYs that I've dealt with in terms of this line of work. So the question arises, is the landfill negatively impacting the aquifer? So I'm thinking, well, in the vicinity of the landfill, the answer is probably yes. What I noticed out there is directly to the west of the landfill, there's a beaver pond. And it doesn't show up on the second map. The second map shows the outline of the wetlands and the streams related to Great Meadow. Mm-hmm. And there's a little arm up there, 12 o'clock or so above Great Meadow. But it doesn't connect to that beaver pond, which I find surprising. I would have thought that, what I know about beavers is you have a stream, and the beaver puts a dam there, and then you have a pond. So that stream must have been there just as long as the Melbourne River, I would have thought. But it doesn't show up on the geologic survey map, the USGS map. Sure.
There's a reason for that.
Is there a reason for that?
Yes,
I don't know.
it's because, and I grew up right next to this location.
Okay.
It's just above the beaver dam, the water comes up out of the ground. It's an underground brook.
Oh, okay.
So there's a spring there, huh?
Yes.
And then it does, south of the beaver dam, it must coalesce into a stream and,
Yep, there's two beaver dams there,
oh,
where
okay.
there were last hunting season.
Oh, all right.
I'll just, a point of reference. This plot of land here,
Yep.
L, that's part of 200 acres, and the other part of it goes from here down around the corner.
Okay.
My dad was William Wood.
Oh, all right.
It's still in the family.
And so, you bring up a good question again about property ownership and boundaries and an aquifer, where a potential well could be located. I think obviously in the vicinity of the landfill and this beaver pond, I'm sure the water quality is not efficient, and there's also really tight land use property boundaries. So what I thought is southwest of the landfill, on the north side of the Great Meadow, there seems to be a large parcel of property, and it looks like the overhead electric lines cut right through there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking that might be a way in and out. Again, in order to get any kind of a big equipment, again, and I keep thinking of a well. I know we're a long ways from that. That's just the way my brain works when thinking of aquifers. So that entails getting equipment in there, and trucks, and maintaining it, things like that. You don't want to be crossing wetlands, you don't want to be filling in wetlands to build a road and access road, things like that. So my proposal is based on looking at a portion of the aquifer in between Great Meadow and the landfill. One of the first things we can do is, I'm thinking of
This lot?
yes, that property right there. I'm not sure if it's town owned or not.
Steve would know. Do you have a,
Yeah,
do you have an outline of what's conservation land?
I'm thinking of this
We're-
parcel right here. And
we're
that's-
in the process of trying to purchase this right now, the Conservation Commission.
Ah, okay.
So it's privately held right now?
Yeah, the owner formerly owned this property too, that the town purchased.
Where the dump is, or the
Yeah.
transfer station?
That's the Sargent family.
Yeah. Okay.
We're
Alright,
also,
so
we're
they're-
also trying to purchase this piece. This is a pretty good road access down about here.
Yeah, I was out there a couple of weeks ago and I drove around down this, just seemed like a never-ending dirt road through the woods. I did notice a lot of tree cutting and logging and things like that. That's not a real harmful land use.
I think the both owners, plus this owner over here, this owner has been harvesting quite a while. These two are trying to complete a harvest before we purchase.
And so, another interesting thing is what you just mentioned, is a spring, which is a vertical flow from lower to upper, percolating up. And is Bog Meadow, is Great Meadow sitting on top of a clay layer or an impervious layer or something like that, and then the sand and gravel aquifer is below that? Or is the meadow itself connected to the aquifer, and it's just the way the topography is, things like that?
And Steve, you may know something about that, right?
You know Rick Vanderpool?
I do not.
He did an ecological study in 2000, and in the process, put in some shallow wells around it. And his report would indicate that the Great Meadow is connected to the aquifer.
Okay. Is that PDF,
I think so.
PowerPoint
Yeah.
that I looked at?
Yeah, I think that was a PowerPoint of
He and
that.
I were out there walking the property last weekend.
Oh,
And
okay.
the report is on our website, the town website, Conservation Commission section.
Sure. Okay. I looked at that PowerPoint. I noticed that there were several wells, but they seemed to be on the southern side. And I think that was mainly because of access. You know, getting a drill rig in to these locations is pretty hard to do. So my focus was to try and answer the question, what's happening downgrade of the landfill? The first step is what I would call an electrical conductivity, an EM survey. And that's basically a two-man crew with some geophysical equipment that they just walk down the power lines and they walk through the woods and they send out a signal through the ground, and that way they can kind of map out plumes. We did this back in the 90s and the 2000s when we closed most of these landfills in this area.
It basically measures the conductivity of the ground, with the idea being that landfills often have highly conductive leachate plumes loaded with things like dissolved iron, dissolved manganese, dissolved other metals, dissolved chloride. All of these things have magnetic properties that make these leachate plumes visible, basically using this geophysical method that Don's talking about. So you can go and by mapping the conductivity, say at the foot of the landfill, say, oh, well, here we seem to have this finger of highly conductive leachate coming from the landfill. So, wells can do that too, but the thing is a well just measures one discrete point, whereas the EM survey can cover much larger areas.
Yeah, the point of the EM is that when you're all done, as Dave says, sometimes you can see these fingers of high conductivity, and that's where you see a well and look at the water quality. At the landfill on that side, there's an existing well, NW6, and that would be an area where we would start off to try and calibrate. We know that NW6 has certain chemistry, elevated levels of manganese and iron. That would get us a ground truthing, if you will, of the EM signal. And then as we move further and further away, we can kind of see how that peters out.
You're thinking two additional wells is gonna give you enough information?
Well, again, I was just trying to get an idea of the preliminary aspect. In my geography, I was thinking of conducting the EM down in these areas, especially the pieces of property that this gentleman was talking about purchasing. And then my thinking is, if there's a little bit of leachate seeping into this beaver pond, and then where does it go? Does it stay in the surface water? Does it flow all the way down into Bog Meadow and the Melvin River and out? Or are there portions of these little streams that are the exact opposite, that the water seeps out of the stream into the aquifer? And if that's the case, does the leachate seeping into the pond, does it dissipate once it hits the surface water? Does it dissolve away? These are the things. So the two wells, just to get a preliminary kind of idea of what's happening further down grade here.
And there's on this third map, there's the NHFG-1666, that's a well. And that's on the other side of the river.
Well, it's documented as an environmental monitoring site, non-secure, but it does look like a USGS type well. I'd have to further investigate that. That one looks like it's just right outside the,
What does NHFG stand for?
I think that's New Hampshire Fish and Game.
If it makes any difference, the retired colonel of Fish and Game lives
Right there.
right there.
Oh, he lives there?
Yes, Marty Garabedian, if you need to speak to him,
Oh,
he's
that's
more
where he
than
lives?
willing, yes.
Oh.
Very, proactive and supportive.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I don't
Married my sister.
All right, so he's gotta be a good guy then.
He's a resource for me.
So you're gonna stay within the aquifer parameters here?
Right, again, on this map, I was thinking, again, here's the landfill, I was thinking of concentrating down in this area. Mainly because, there's so many issues out there, right, getting into that area could be difficult. There's that dirt road that comes down
Right.
through this property, but then coming up and down the power lines.
Yeah, the power line can go either way, and you might find yourself running into a bog out there,
Mhm. Oh my gosh.
unless it's winter
Yeah.
and it freezes up.
Mhm.
But there are other avenues of approach into this, and they're logging, so I'm sure they've done some crossings
Yep,
just to make their
and
skid roads.
sure, and getting permission to cross between these properties can be tricky. We've done that before, and we have legal access agreements that can.
Well, and some of it's owned by the town, so we just have to establish where we're going there.
Right, so, I guess my big concept is, trying to investigate the aquifer, but at the same time, have enough land use or property boundaries where it could make sense. I don't know what the population trend is, and if you eventually see yourself putting in a municipal water supply well, but it's always.
Well, I
a
think
good
there are
idea.
probably better places to put it than right there. I mean, we have a couple of different areas in town that have aquifer. So I think it's, I'm not gonna, I mean, it's gonna be a long time, we only have a few thousand people living here. So I'd imagine if we put in a water system, then we have to put in a septic system as well, which is, I think, beyond my lifetime and probably yours as well.
Yeah, if you could figure out a way to tap into this aquifer and sell the water to the Tilton Northwood
Yeah,
Water
there you go.
District, they would love it.
Yeah.
Trying to help them in the same situation.
Well, if we could find a way to do it without having some Swiss company take it over and take all the water out, would be fine, I
Yeah.
think. It's just a matter of.
Well, they pay a lot of money.
Yeah.
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 Sometimes I just as soon have a glass of water than.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the other aspect is, a municipal water supply depresses the water table and it can reach out several hundred feet and it can tap into the surface wetlands and Melvin River and things like that, so you have to take into account that as well. So,
And
It's
maybe
all interconnected, isn't it?
it is.
put
yeah.
additional pressure on the closed landfill.
Mhm.
And creating a draw from that, I would think.
Yeah, that's another aspect. Right now it appears to be discharging into the beaver pond, but if you tap it and you alter the drawdowns and the gradients and things like that. Another important aspect of these sand and gravel aquifers is that they have a way of cleaning itself up. The longer the water travels through it, the native bacteria and geochemistry tends to clean itself up. But these are all unknowns. Sure.
I have a couple of comments and questions, and I'll just get into them. Please note that we inadvertently left out the sampling of the seep. Where is that sample and has it been tested?
Yeah, that was done. Yeah, we had, I think when we met last time, the sampling just happened a few days before. So those results, I believe, are available, and they're, if I remember right, I looked at them last week, and the results were, I think, similar to MW6, I'm sorry, WP1. WP1 was installed, as we talked about, to replace sampling of the seep, and the results were fairly similar, not exact, but similar. If you like, I can once I get back to the office, I can put those together.
That's something that we paid for, correct?
Oh yeah, and that's why when they were inadvertently left off of the regular sampling that was done back in August, we wanted to get it done. So
I asked the question the last time you were here, and you did a good job. This seep that was tested, over here on the right being aesthetically, it's a little danger and no danger to its 3 Mile Island.
yeah.
Where are those results on that continuum?
Oh, it's way on the lower end.
So,
Yeah,
for example, we don't need to, and I don't want this to be a loaded question, it's not like we have to get engineers out there and put a well in by tomorrow because it's 3 Mile Island, right?
No,
Is that
no.
your representation?
I mean, I'll be the first to admit that, when you look at it, when somebody, and I think this was kind of the whole thing, in fact, I think you handed out that picture somebody had taken of that, of the sheen and what have you. And I think everybody will admit it's not pleasing to look at. Is it unexpected, given that it's a landfill? Absolutely not. Because like I said, we work on all kinds of landfills, and we've seen that kind of metal stained water kind of sheen before. It's not untypical. And we have enough sampling data, years of data, in fact, to show that yes, there's impacts. Is it 3 Mile Island? No. If it was, the DES would have been out all over.
And
all over
you would have been here because, as I've been told, you speak DES and they respect your opinion. So that's a compliment to you.
I speak the language. Yes, I do speak the language.
I also understand that if there's a Rube Goldberg test, you take and stir something up and you watch how it comes back together. And all I know is that gasoline and oil operate one way, and oil and vinegar operate another way.
Yeah.
So that Rube Goldberg test, is there any hint of what it is?
Well,
Do you understand my question? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, and I was just gonna ask you, you said you were out walking the area. Did you see a similar sheen down in the Great Meadow area? Did you happen to
I
notice?
didn't go that far.
Oh, okay. But you're right, if it's, these landfills, excuse me, a natural, healthy wetland will produce that similar sheen. And it looks scary. The test is you stick a stick in it and you stir it around, and if it breaks up into
like it's
chunks
a
of-
solid layer.
Yeah, if it breaks up into what looks like plates, that's normal and natural and healthy.
If it's
I'm
oil.
able- Yeah, it's just gonna keep swirling around.
My next point is, I'd like to point out, and it's only because I'm a native, I'm aware of these things, and I want to share them with you. As far as, I don't want to say causes, but factors, you have a landfill. Just as you come in, there's a former site that was the septic disposal for years, and you have that on your map.
Juberts.
Yes.
Mhm.
You also have, as, even where the landfill is, on both sides, extensive sand pit operations. I'm 70 years old and they're older than me. The ones on the west side of the road, Sergeant's Way, it's my understanding that they've excavated in places down to within 10 feet of the aquifer. Excuse me, 10 feet of the water table.
Yep,
There's a difference.
sure.
As you look at this map, in green on the right-hand side, there's PSNH Tuftonboro substation, and that's green.
That's
One of the substructures has been removed recently in the last 2 years on the south side of Transformer Hill.
But that green is a above-ground storage tank, according to the legend,
But
correct?
it's also
Yeah.
disposals, asbestos disposal.
Not necessarily.
All right, well, you may know
And-
that just from,
Right, and the other thing is, in my lifetime, the transformers have gone from hazardous materials to non-hazardous materials. And in my lifetime, I'm not talking about any culpability or illegal activity, but like things happen at landfills, things get spilled at asbestos sites or whatever. I go back to my days in the fire department, when one of those transformers would come down, it was a hazardous situation.
yep.
Another thing is if where that transformer is and you come down the hill, there's Pine Swamp Brook. And if you look at, there's a metal post that's up, a square post, and it's bent. Those were put in my 37-year absence in Tuftonboro by, I think, the federal government that put testing wells all over Tuftonboro. I don't know if it's active. All I know is that the highway department didn't remove it when they redid that bridge.
So that's actually a well, like
I-
a protective casing.
I was
well?
told by Norm Vidham, who since passed away and was a selectman involved in these things, that it was some type of well put in years ago by the government.
Yeah, that might have been to help investigate this aquifer, because there are data points throughout this whole blue
Yes,
ball.
right.
And I think some of them are still around, some of them are just
On,
decayed away.
on the farm I grew up, Twin Mountain Farm, is in walking distance here. In talking to my grandparents and their friends, my parents and their friends, the water rivals the purity of the water that they get at Castle on the Clouds. Back pre-Civil War, post-Civil War, you'd come and get your water there.
In this general area?
In that farmhouse you see just up the road, there's a 14-acre field.
Oh, okay.
The other thing is car storage. It's not on here, but go to the word in parentheses where it says formerly Dave's. Okay, so far?
I don't see it.
Melvin River Dam and then formerly Dave's in parentheses, just above it.
Oh, sure, yeah.
See,
The word septic.
Go
is
across the
formerly
street,
Dave's.
go across the street,
Yep.
right here.
Mhm.
This is a site, in my 70 years, has been, and it still is, and if you drive by it, it'll be perfectly obvious. We've worked long and hard to get it cleaned up. Talk about auto storage and things leaking and whatnot.
Mhm. Yeah, this map was generated by the DES GIS website. I said, everything in the legend, plot where these are, plot where that is. And when I look at it, I said, that area doesn't look that bad. But as a resident here, where all the monies have been right, so to speak.
And my point is, I've just listed off 6 things that in together could possibly creating an issue. And it's like a cake, there's many recipes that go into it.
Exactly, and in terms of a water supply, a well, process and permitting, it's a series of phases. And one of the biggest, in phase 1, one of the big issues is show us where all the potential sources of contamination are. And plot them on these maps.
And I understand that sometimes it takes decades or a century for stuff to migrate and whatnot. The other thing is, for public record, I'm not trying to protect or absolve or eliminate the landfill from being the cause. I have an open mind. It could be a combination of things. Just one other thing. Larry, you have a meter that measures what?
Conductivity.
Okay, it needs a battery, right?
It needs basically platinizing. Right? It's an old YSI SET meter
Mhm.
that's still functional, but I haven't ever been able to really calibrate it, and that probe is recommended to be replatinized. That was like a $600 item.
My asking is, you have a guy who has a background, I don't expect him to walk around there, but is that a piece of equipment the town can rejuvenate that would do some investigatory work?
Sure. Especially if you know the trails and the back roads and things like that to get into these places.
No, it's just a thought, if it's available. I have some other comments, but I'll wait, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, I appreciate you having a conversation with you.
So what you're proposing here is an initial step that may generate information that would suggest additional testing beyond this at some point in the future.
Correct. And it could also generate information that says it's not worthwhile going forward. The water quality, further downgrading of the landfill may prohibit any kind of, no, I shouldn't say that. Engineers can design anything, a state-of-the-art water quality they can deal with. But that's very expensive.
Right.
But it's designed to give you some answers.
Mhm.
Is it worthwhile to go forward, to look into these potential properties that you folks are gonna buy? And it may give you some answers that, yes, indeed, it's property that's well worth purchasing. 50 years from now, terrific place to put in a water supply will. The water quality may give you some facts. You may say, well, the water quality from that landfill is a lot, the impacts are a lot further downgraded than we thought. May not be a great place to put in a well, but it's still worthwhile to buy the property. Things like that.
Are you limited by installing wells by season?
No. they have these.
Does it assist you, for example, if we went to town meeting and then this was approved? I mean, you can't do it in the spring when there's water, do it when the ground is frozen?
Well, we can do it anytime.
It makes sense that if there's a lot of water, it impacts your
Yeah,
equipment
yeah,
getting in
yeah,
there.
probably with the caveat that obviously, if say that power line cut was boggy in places, you know, obviously in spring.
Then the winter time would be probably the best time to go in.
It could be, again, if it's a season where we're getting 5 feet of snow, that can be a little bit problematic. Not that it can't be overcome, but
So
of
what
course,
is an
usually when you have to
early freeze?
overcome stuff, it just gets more expensive.
An early freeze, real cold before we get any snow, so everything freezes up real well.
Yeah.
Outside of the black fly season and the ticks, that's always kind of nice too.
Yeah.
So we got a little window in October.
Yes, it is the
Yeah.
big capital of the world.
And that's what our field guide said.
Yeah, he said last time he was in the landfill, it was like a second skin. There were so many ticks.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a big part of the sidewalk to get together all that in.
Right.
And
If you back the drilling out of the proposal, it's only $7,500 to do electromagnetic survey and the document surveys and the reconnaissance. So we may want to look at finding $7,500 and starting the process. Maybe not, I don't know that we have money enough to drill the wells without busting into somebody else's budget.
Right.
So,
We
so
should get the
if,
process started.
yeah, if we look at the proposal and we embrace doing the first 3 items at this point, those are things that all would happen before you get to the well drilling piece anyway, correct?
Yeah.
Because that's gonna indicate where, part of what's gonna be used to indicate where you would site the wells.
correct.
And based upon that, then we can do some further development and it seems like a reasonable start to me.
Yeah, I think we need to start on it just because there's concern. And I don't know if there's any expansion to the survey that was done for the landfill closure since it closed. So this is actually an expansion.
Yeah, I don't think, since post-closure monitoring began, I don't think anything's really of an investigative nature has really happened, other than just monitoring, ongoing monitoring.
Yeah, these drill rigs, they look like tanks. They have track mount,
Yep.
and they can bushwhack through the woods. They can go through bogs. You don't want them to go too deep because they can tend to sink. Midsummer, late spring, dead of winter, they can get in there.
I'd like to open the conversation to our Conservation Commission guys here. Steve, Larry.
Everything that I've heard sounds fine. I mean, that's exactly what I think is the next follow through to go through. Is logically to go to see what the initial proposal is going to tell us. I think that that's absolutely the right way to do it. I had a question about the water quality analysis, only from the perspective of reading some of the past disposal practices, and they're entirely limited of what was in that landfill. So it was my understanding that a company, and I think it's the company out on 109, that was implicated in some spills, dumped and ends up being 1,4-dioxane into that. And there could be other sources too, but that's there. And just from a perspective of listening to several lectures about that particular chemical, and I know it's been detected there, that would be something I think I would want to look at, because it sounds like they're all over the PFAS stuff, but I would.
Yeah.
And
And
I
that's
don't know
been
if
found at the site too.
Yeah, and I don't know if it is so different from the PFAS that I would assume the analysis is quite different, but in terms of how it reacts in the water, I think they're similar, don't they? They don't get really dissolved in the water, they travel with the water.
Yeah, 1,4-dioxane, I know less about. Certainly the PFAS are very persistent. They don't break down
Right.
very, very easily. The analysis for the two chemicals are different, like you say. Generally, you have to test specifically for 1,4-dioxane sort of on its own, because the standard for it, which I believe, I don't know if you've heard this, Larry, I think it's going to be lowered.
Yes, yeah.
For it, I just heard. So that's got to be, you have to use this particular kind of analysis called a SIM analysis in order to get down to the detection limits you need to get below the standard, because you don't want your detection limits to be above the standard. But how 1,4-dioxane reacts in the environment, I know less about. But I know that it's often related to chlorinated solvents, whereas PFAS is they're used for different things. But we find both of them in landfills. There's no two ways about that.
So would you say in this instance that if you see one, you're likely to the others present?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I think it makes sense to test for both. And if it turns out that you do not find one or the other, that you have a basis for saying we don't have to go forward and test for them. But I wouldn't make any assumptions up front that either one of them are there or not there.
That's all. All any comments?
Steve,
I
you're
don't-
observing.
I don't feel technically qualified
Your
to
process.
comment. I don't feel confident that on the scale of everything that's going on environmentally in our world, that this is worth a lot of effort. And yet, I'm probably one of those people too who says, I'd like to know what we're actually doing here, what we did with the landfill, what does that mean for the aquifer? So what if it's bad news? Then you gotta wrestle with it, we gotta do something about it. We probably spend more money doing that than anything else we've ever done and will ever do in town. So, there's a lot to chew on. I think I want to get a second opinion before I spend this kind of money. From somebody who doesn't have any skin in the game, so to
Sure.
speak.
As I try to say, these type of investigations, they go in phases, and each phase, the results may say it's just not worth going any further. It could be water quality, it could be the volume of water that you could potentially get out of a particular spot on that piece of property. Again, on the first map, the lighter blue is an aquifer material, the darker blue is a better portion of the aquifer, so to speak. In the area between Great Meadow and the landfill, it's the light blue. That could be a 200 gallon a minute well.
So the darker blue produces more?
Correct. Yeah. So you might spend whatever, $25,000 looking into the area between Great Meadow and the landfill. Yeah, okay, not too bad. But then you turn your eyes to the far western portion of the aquifer where it's the darkest blue. Who owns that area? Are there as many potential sources of contamination in that part of town? things like that. You're right, you know, the aquifer, it's quite extensive. And there's properties sitting on top of it.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make the following suggestion.
All right.
First of all, I'd like this issue tabled to our next meeting. It does two things. First of all, it allows us to get in writing what the status of the most recent blowout testing is. I don't want to move forward until I understand that. The other thing is, we're on YouTube and it allows the public to respond to this discussion that they have a right to know. I wonder if it's worthwhile to have Larry's meter fixed, if it's short money. I'm thinking the fire department uses the thermal imaging camera and uses its gas meters all the time to eliminate issues. And yes, they cost money, but I don't know if there's money we could find somewhere for that.
Conservation's got money.
The other thing is, and I'll just toss this out, and it's an editorial comment. I like what you and Chip have suggested, that if we could find some money someplace, and it's 4 figures, to do some preliminary work that has to be done. I do like the idea, if we do testing, that it be a warrant article for a couple of reasons. First of all, that it gives time to gather all the information. It's the taxpayers who foot the bill, and we'd ask these people to come in and explain it to them. And it also locks that money into only that project. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm kind of in agreement with that. Fine, wait until next week. If we can't just let it lie fallow for.
Yes, I'm trying to balance the two.
Well, I think we've made some good progress towards understanding a way forward. And in my mind, there's benefit this year to getting started in whatever we do early enough that we can have some information available to help us put together a budget for next year that might have resources available in it to actually take it a step further down the road. But having said that, I don't see that there's, that today is the day that we have to
It's not deep.
have to launch this thing. So
And
it's,
just as curiosity, why was this map created? Just to give us
Why did I bring it
No,
today?
Why did
It's a geological survey.
New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services?
Sure, they try and map out the entire state of New Hampshire, and they do it in terms of watersheds. This is the Winnipesaukee River. To the west, you have the, I think it's the Merrimack, Upper Merrimack, Lower Merrimack, to help communities.
For things just like this.
Yeah, to understand what potential resources they have in town and where they may want to focus their attention.
Land protection, you know.
I mean, we have another issue that's rearing its ugly head, which is right on top of that, where Wolfboro wants to pump in 300,000 gallons worth of effluent.
Oh, from their wastewater treatment
Or
system.
So
Oh, yeah.
it's right on top of the
Yep.
aquifer. I mean, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Whatever. It seems, have you been contracted by them?
No, but we are aware of that. Dave lives in Wolfboro, and I have, I do the same type of, I manage the same type of projects at landfills in Wolfboro as well. And solid waste facility in Workers Drive, so we kind of understand what's going on.
Yeah.
See, I'm old enough to remember those
It's going
things.
to work for you in the
Yeah.
future.
yep.
Yeah, and you mentioned, this is a standard scenario in these small towns. Somebody owned property and they had all the sand and gravel. Can't really farm it, but there's a market for it. So they dug it out, they mined it off, they sold it to developers, and it's down in highways throughout New England. And then you have a hole in the ground. Well, now what do we do with it?
Mhm.
Fill it in.
Fill it in with trash. And in the 50s through the 60s and the 70s, it wasn't really an issue.
When I lived in Durham and Madbury, where Madbury Meadows used to be was a mountain.
Yeah.
And that is, that,
We worked on that site.
and that doubled and tripled the size of the airport in Boston.
Sure. Yeah.
Every 45 minutes, a train, 100 cars.
Yeah, wonderful. Now you have this big giant hole, well, let's fill it in. And then it tends to seep out, and here we are.
But before people leave, I want to thank these guys over here, and I want to thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah,
coming in and
try-
being
try it once.
resources. You've been reasonable, fair, thank
You
you.
can keep those maps.
All right. Thank you very much.
Have a good summer. What's
What's left of it?
I got you.
September's good.
Yep.
You're safe.
Just
Thanks.
Yeah, keep those back.
All right, Dave?
All right.
Thank you, sir. See you again.
Good to see you.
I can't remember.
It's a wooden boat, thank you.
Yeah, do you have a wooden boat?
I don't currently, I paid my last one.
I live in Kittery, Maine, and I'm a member of the Conservation Commission there too.
What kind of boats do you have?
Although down there, there's just all.
Playing paddle canoe.
Like a cedar strip?
Yeah,
Kind of, it's, the
the
last
engineers nowadays can put in the neighborhoods.
Oh, yeah.
Subdevelopment.
Yeah, we did a cedar strip canoe when my wife and I lived in Maine years and years ago. It was a fun project, I was keeping friends, so we're gonna build another one.
All the uplands got houses on it.
Good seeing you. Larry?
All right.
Good
Thank you,
seeing you,
gentlemen.
thanks for your time.
Thanks.
I will see you around. All right, take care.
Hey, Jim, come on down. How are you?
Hey, how are you?
Tired. My brain is tired from trying to get my arms around this
Science.
aquifer thing. Yeah,
Chemistry.
yeah, all this stuff that is sort of foreign to me, for sure.
Downtown Tufton.
Yep, yep,
Well, hopefully mine will be short and easy.
good.
Basically, the last month or so, we've been working on, we finished up the road grading. We've checked roads before the heavy rains, cut in some water diverters before we had any washout problems. And cleaned up a few downed trees. And the rest of the time, it's been on Brown Road, the section that's going to be paved. We've already replaced all the metal culverts that need to be changed. We rebuilt a catch basin, and we've been cutting the pavement to remove the rocks from underneath the pavement in the areas that we can see that they're bubbled up. Next, we'll probably be working on the drainage, but
Yeah, I came across there yesterday, and I think you got them all. There was a major problem there right at the entrance to Hidden Valley.
yep.
And I didn't notice that the car was bouncing around too much.
In the springtime, that's really bad.
Yeah.
It'll sink a foot.
And it's, I'm sure it's worse on you guys' truck than it is on mine, because I don't have a plow pushing snow on that bump, but.
Yeah, and you notice it more in a plow truck for sure. But yeah, so we're making progress on that. I've talked to Frank Carroll about a paving schedule, a tentative paving schedule. It's looking like around sometime beginning of September, but it could go a little bit either way.
What did he give you for an estimate?
All the estimates the same as we had before.
Okay, can I talk about that?
Sure.
Brown Road is 7,250 feet, correct?
For the total length?
For this, what we budgeted for this
Okay.
year.
I have that somewhere.
Yep.
What did you come up with?
That's what I have.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as,
And that's, I'm going by this here.
okay, yep.
To reclaim, he budgeted $14,310. There's a 2-inch base coat of pavement for $70,000, and the shoulders may be as high as $10,000. That's for $94,310. That all comes out of the warrant article, right?
Yes.
The warrant article as of today has $91,674. Is Mr. Carroll willing to do that project for $91,674?
The last time we were here, you guys told me to do it right and that we would figure out how we were gonna come up with the money.
Okay, where do we get the money, folks?
Didn't we say that? Didn't we say there was money set aside? I think there was, talked about.
There is paving money, yeah. And
That's the last I was.
So you exhausted your culvert budget on your apron paving, how was that? I mean, that leaves much, you only need about $3,000.
right.
I think there's $3,000 somewhere in here.
We're already $58,000 we need for next winter.
Yes, I mean, you can't keep stealing from summer.
Right.
Just can't do it.
Yeah.
You can sit next to you. That's the estimate.
Yep.
And that's what I've come up with. And as of 4 days ago, your budget.
Yep, I have that. So,
Well, I mean, if you're estimating 58, I think you're in agreement that we need to retain
And
58,000.
that needs to come out
But the
again.
719 budget that I'm looking at, it's got $156,000 left in it to spend.
Right.
Yep.
So we take 56,000 out just to make it math easy, because we're all tired.
Yeah, it's around $100,000, $95,000.
So are you gonna mow? What would happen to the mowing?
I'm not doing the mowing until I feel more confident about where we're at on this budget. I
Yep.
think that should be something that gets done later in the season at this point, because I'm not 100% sure we're gonna make it.
Yep, no,
Well, I'm 100% sure we are gonna make it. So,
yeah.
one way or
No,
another.
Yeah, with or
We're
without
not gonna
Colin.
close down.
No, I think it's, that's prudent to put that off. Obviously, too many years in a row where it's not done is gonna be a real problem, but,
Yeah.
we're tight. So-
Yes.
All right, so here's a thought with respect to the paving. There's an estimate of $10,000 for the shoulder graveling, right?
Yes.
And that's having Carol do the shoulders. I know that there've been times in the past when you've done the shoulders for shorter money, so
Yep.
maybe that's an option when we get down there. But
So it would have to be 40% lower,
Hmm?
a 40% difference.
Hmm.
Is that, I mean, I'm happy with the way Durgan Road has withstood some of these
That
floods
was
we've had.
Frank Carroll that did that.
Yep.
That
We,
stood right up.
yeah, we did, last year we did Union Wharf, but Union Wharf much flatter,
Mhm.
Right.
and
Yep,
it really wasn't filled up as high as well, so,
yep.
but we did it for probably 40% less. But that was a situation that may be a little bit different.
Right,
than this.
okay, all right,
We can look at that at a later date.
yep.
The only issue is the town specs for a road, the aprons have to be 2 feet wide. Not the width of the shovel.
I'm sorry, what?
The town specs for a town road, the apron should be 2 feet wide,
Uh-huh.
not the width of a shovel. So it should be put down with a, a spreader and roll, that's the thing.
Yep.
I mean, it should be done to the specs there, approved by the town.
Or we could just move the fog line in another 2 feet.
Yep,
Although, are we striping? Did we get that?
We're on the schedule. We are on the schedule. They didn't give us, they wouldn't give me a date. They're behind.
yep.
But
Well, I know when we last talked, they were gonna coordinate, particularly the Durgan Road part with the part on Chickville Road down in Ossipee. And of course, none of that's been striped yet, so.
Have they given you an estimate?
we had the estimate from last year.
It's $8,000. Are they gonna stay within the $8,000?
Yeah, it's a shoreline PD and PB.
I am assuming that we should be the same as the estimate.
Okay. Catch basins, for example, we had $3,500 and we're over on that budget.
Well, we knew that. We knew that from the get-go last year.
I expect excuse me. I want to say this as non-adversarially as I can, and I hope you understand that. We're more than halfway through the busiest time of the year, and the striping isn't done yet. and I don't know whether it's gonna be less than $8,000 or not. Do you understand where I'm coming from?
Yep.
And I'm being as straightforward as I can be. Thank you.
Well, I take, as you know, I take a different view than you do.
Yes.
The budget is put together as a way to project where we expect the expense to be. The number that we have to live by is the bottom line, as you know. Okay, so if you spend a little more on catch basins than what was in the budget, for whatever reason, that becomes a piece of information that that can go into the budgeting process for next year, and you factor into your expense on other things. It's like, okay, well, I thought I was gonna spend $3,500, a little more than that, so I have to spend less someplace else because we still gotta stay with what we have budgeted.
I don't know if you guys remember, but I think I told you this last fall, that we needed, I put down a number for that, but because we only did half last year, I think you suggested that number to be smaller, and that's what we went with.
Okay,
Okay.
But I did ask for it.
right,
I knew it was gonna be more than that.
yeah.
That's a fair
And
statement, and you're accurate.
you know, to maybe avoid extensive research, I mean, if you really wanna know what a catch basin costs to repair, you figure out what the last 15 of them cost you to repair, divide that by 15, and that's the average cost. And then if you come in with, I'm gonna do 10 catch basins next year, that's the number.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter what, you know, what changes have occurred or whatever, that's the number, because it's a moving number going forward, that's the average catch basin. We could do that on every single line, but it's an exercise that, I guess the presumption is that having been in the position for a number of years, you know what number you need. But every year it seems to be not enough, so maybe we do have to go through that exercise of figuring out what it actually costs to do some of this stuff.
Well, there's a couple positives here. First of all, he's been reelected 3 times, and the Selectmen, the Budget Committee, the CIP, and the town meeting were all willing to add to his budget.
Well, we did add to the budget.
Yes.
We just added places where we presumed we needed.
Yep, but I mean, I knew, we kind of knew, I said that last year, we were gonna come up a little bit short, but that's all right. We'll have to make it up somewhere else, but.
As
So
far
the
as
catch basin, we knew that, I knew
As
that.
far as the striping is concerned, I mean, we're the guy that comes into the store and buys half a loaf of bread, and the next customer is coming in and buying $200 worth of groceries. I mean, we're not gonna get at the head of the list with Durgan Road to stripe when there's all of these larger projects with more profit that are asking for striping. So I'm not as concerned about the timing. I mean, it's just gonna get done when it gets done.
All I know is I go to the TAC meeting and I get samples from 7 other towns. They know how many linear feet of yellow line they need, how many linear feet of white line they need. We listed the roads that need to be done. That's a very simple mathematical formula, and it goes up to bid. It's very simple. I don't expect him to hire a secretary just to do every one of these items.
Well, and I don't wanna compare a road agent town, a single road agent town with a highway department town.
And we're very fortunate in what we have, yes.
I'm a firm believer, if you find somebody good, you stick with them, you know? I think that we should stick with the company that we have.
Yes.
Using it, they've done a good job, they do the local towns around us, and we will be done at the same time they are.
Right.
Yeah, I'm fine with the striping. And I'm fine with finding $4,000. I think it's in there somewhere. I don't think you're gonna get any mowing done this year, personally. I just don't see it happening.
No, I'm a little nervous about being able to do it, absolutely, especially if we're trying to put $50,000 into the budget for winter, you know, it's.
Well, I have to agree with you. Would you rather mow or not plow snow? And guess what?
I'd rather not plow snow.
I'd rather-
It was me.
Not plowing snow has more of an adverse impact
Interested in opposing the list.
than not mowing, for sure.
On the culvert replacements, did we replace some culverts on Brown Road?
Yes.
Subject to that culverts survey we had done by.
Yeah, we replaced anyone that's all of them that were metal, just because they all have a short lifespan, I don't know, at this point. I think they were put in probably like Reg Covey days.
Mhm.
Or earlier. Snuffy
Yeah.
Smith.
Maybe.
Yep. To change, this is the subject slightly, but we have had a resident up on Sawyer Road talk with us about paving that section of road, and I think it's a sense of this board that it's something that makes sense to consider for next year. It would be helpful to know what the cost of paving that would, so maybe you can get an estimate for that from Carol. And again, we don't need it now, but as we go, get it in the budget.
For next year.
And it's the only section of Sawyer Road that's unpaved, is that
Yes, that's correct.
correct?
Yes.
And there's two prices. It's a base coat and then the finish coat, correct?
That's how we've been doing
I
it.
think if I remember correctly, it's gonna be changed. It was 11,000 for one and 7,000 for the other, but I might have it confused. And it has to be a warrant article because not paving it was passed at town meeting, correct?
Was there
Not necessarily, but it's a specific piece that's outside of some of the stuff. It would be my feeling that putting it on as a separate article in the warrant makes sense. Yeah, there was a vote several years ago when
directing not to pave?
when it was an article to pave it that was voted down. But
So it wasn't
again,
included in the-
no means no. It doesn't extend from now until the end of time. So
You missed that?
Yes. Why would-
Mariana standing up,
Oh.
all the cards up, no.
yeah,
Yeah.
He did a good job of selling that.
he did. Yes,
That's
right.
part of democracy,
Yeah.
whether I like the issue or not. The
Yeah.
citizen has a right to stand up and convince you
Right.
to do something or not do something.
So.
Do you have any other?
No,
Can you contact Larry Gill about the beaver issues?
can you?
Larry Gill, the gentleman that was just here.
Beaver issues where?
They're like, we normally go through you, you have a contact, right?
Well, yeah, we do. I mean, local guy, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. On Durgan Road, there's a granite post with a mailbox put on it that's within 2 feet of the tar.
Oh, it must be the other one.
Gonna hurt when it comes down.
Hmm?
That's gonna hurt when it comes down.
I just don't want his granite post damaged and
I'm more concerned about our plan.
well, that, it's a code concern.
Yeah.
Sodom Road Bridge is done.
Hmm.
Is it okay for him to remove the 3 signs?
I think
Well,
we-
we have correspondence to deal with. Let's deal with it right now.
Sign off on that.
So, yep. There's someplace. Maybe I put it in this folder. Yep, so we have here a letter from HEB suggesting that we can restore the load limit from 15 tons back to the regular E2 for the bridge, based upon the work that was done. And so I'll entertain a motion to that effect.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion?
That's good.
There was a question in our last meeting about removing it, and as a board, we agreed, let's wait till HEB sends us a letter saying it's all done, and we're gonna tell the state that, that it's back to full load carrying capacity, so, all in favor?
Aye.
Uh,
And there's what, 3 signs said limited.
Yep.
Yep,
Save them for the next bridge.
We're I was thinking the same thing, we're gonna need it soon.
yeah, we might,
I had a question. when I talk to the people there, over the years, the road has been tarred time and time again, and there's about that much tar built up,
Asphalt.
asphalt. They recommend that eventually that be ground down and removed. I'm wondering, is we have at least 3 bridges in town that's happened to over the years, right? There's the one on Melvin, New Road, and there's one out on Tuftonboro Neck, right?
Those were paid before me.
Yeah,
But,
well,
but,
in town-
but it makes sense that without doing borings or anything.
Yep.
Tuftonboro Neck is a culvert, so it's different.
It's a box culvert.
So it's-
No, it isn't.
No, it's
No,
round.
it's
Is it round?
it's a corrugated steel culvert. Huh?
The Melvin River one's got no bottom, but it's a round culvert.
That one, I think, has only been
well,
paid once. though, right?
That's on High Street.
Yeah.
We're talking about the one on New Road.
By Hales.
Yeah, and, yeah, I mean, when I observe road paving generally on a bridge, you see they grind the old pavement off. And part of that is, of course, because that's the extra weight you put on the
Yep.
bridge doing it, so. Apparently, that wasn't done on the bridge on Sodom Road, or at least not down to the deck. They had several, what was it, 6 inches of pavement,
I was told a foot.
a foot.
Yeah, I was told, quote, about a foot. My question is, and this isn't blaming anybody, but going forward, that we need to have the engineer test bore it, or ask for Piper, is that the name of the company? You know, their expertise, what it would cost to bring each of those bridges up to, I don't want to say state specifications. Do we want to do Tuftonboro Neck Bridge if it's going to be rebuilt in the next decade? Do you understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, there's no point adding to the problem.
Right, and those projects there, I would support being a separate warrant article, so they're explained and talked about and whatever. I don't see that it's a top priority, but I see that, because I don't think it's a safety issue, but it's an upgrade.
Part of what goes into our knowledge base. Karen?
And just one thing I thought of that you folks had in there until you met with Jim was the highway buildings painting quote.
I was gonna ask about that.
Okay, so it should be in the purple folder, I think.
That was my next one. Can we
Oh,
talk
okay,
about the paint?
okay.
Sure.
It's in the purple folder.
Yep. Oh,
What's the status of that?
We haven't had the time yet to cut around the sand shed building. There's a lot of large trees that have grown up now. They're 30, 40 feet tall that we've got to clean out before it can be done. And then we'll probably have to even stump it.
Now, the $7,450 does not come out of your budget, comes out of the building budget, right?
it comes out of his building budget. Doesn't
Does it come out of your budget?
It comes out of the building, the highway buildings building budget, which
So,
includes, so it's a budget he's responsible for. But that includes electricity and maintenance and propane and all those kinds of things for that building. But it is in the buildings budget.
Okay.
So it's not in the highway budget that we've been talking about.
Yep.
So anyway, you gotta clear out around the sand shed.
Yes.
Yep.
Under government, general government buildings, in this year's budget, 4191-03, highway building maintenance, $6,500. That's what we budgeted in that line. So his estimate's over that, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this estimate doesn't include the time and money to cut a few trees, right?
I'm not sure why that is. I thought I turned the budget into you guys, or his estimate proposal into you guys. I don't know how.
I have it right here, $7,450.
Yeah, but I gave that to you last year.
Dated 5/26/18.
Okay, so maybe it was an earlier estimate that he was
Well,
working with.
maybe.
And it's,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, because I gave you an estimate last year for it.
My thought is, does it make sense just, if we still have the money in government buildings, is to spend that amount, and if one building doesn't get done, we do it another year.
That makes sense. Makes
And
sense.
what is-
You know, because what's happening here is, I'm sorry to keep saying I look back, but remember, we had to replace the doors. And the question was, well, what about the woodwork, what about electrical? And yep, we had money for the doors, but guess what? Your budget got attacked because the electrical had to be repaired back to the meter to make it legal and safe.
Yep.
That's where I'm coming from. It's,
So I'm just a little confused about the letter. What does the County Road Bridge have to do with any of this?
Oh, I think we're on a different subject now.
Yeah.
Well, it was on the cover letter there.
that involved the painter giving us.
Okay, so we didn't get an estimate on the County Road Bridge
No.
because of,
Because floorboards need to be replaced,
All right.
in his opinion.
okay.
Well, at next meeting, can you come in and contact Dave
Yep.
and see if we can negotiate something? And I'd be willing I want these projects to move along, because you have other things that need to be done up there, like the cement work and stuff like that. And if we keep pushing these things down the street, it impacts your operations.
We did repair that one block that was
Yeah.
coming apart on the wall. So that's been replaced earlier this year.
I have some other things. Truck issues, how are we coming on those, the 2 trucks?
Well, we're using the new one now for the road construction, which I can't give it to them. They want us to leave it for a month and hopefully they'll get to it, which seems like an odd way to do business, but that's how they want it done. I can't leave it there right now until we get this project finished up. That'll leave us with no town trucks since we haven't done anything with the 6-wheeler yet. You and I talked about we're gonna have somebody look at that before we do any work to fix it.
Yes. I checked with the state of New Hampshire. They said that there were 2 facilities close by where it goes up on a lift and a certified mechanic looks at it and gives you a list of what's good, what's bad, etc. One is in Tamworth and one's in Middleton.
Did you say Tamworth then?
Yeah, I didn't ask how much it would cost to do that, but I'd work with you on that. So
Yeah, I'd like to do that so that we can, get moving. I'd like to have that truck back as soon as we can. It would
Right.
be handy to have. I mean, if it's just a matter of welding, I'd love to do it.
I'll explain to you my situation is I think the town is well served by having a fleet that it has. But I need to, in my mind, I need to know at what point is that truck no longer serviceable. You had one identical to it and you told me that, it was too much to repair and it wasn't cost effective to run, and you're a pretty damn good businessman, my friend. But it's okay for the truck to, this not work and that not work and whatever, and if it needs to be replaced, I'll vote to replace it.
I think we're there at the point of replacing it for sure. I was just hoping we could stretch it out to get to that point between now and then. is where
I
I'm
remember
at.
when I went down and saw it in pieces at Rochester Truck 3 years ago, and it wasn't quite as far gone on the interior, the transmission they pulled out, the transfer case, did some work on the engine, and the guy was nice, went over it with me, and he says, Lloyd, within 2 or 3 years, you ought to think about replacing this vehicle. It's a piece of equipment that just gets used in bad weather and rust affects it and all that. And I don't see too many trucks out there in town government and state government that are that age that are still functioning. Plowing, I noticed that when I follow it, the guys pick up the wing, and even before they get around the tree they're going around, the wing is falling down again. I mean, how can you or a driver be successful? I want you guys to be safe and successful. So, tell you what.
We had this conversation at an earlier meeting, and I think we're all supportive of replacing this truck, but we cannot do it this year. So we have to find a way between now and when we can replace it to make it work. And that's going to include identifying and addressing the current operating safety deficiencies and getting it done. So I don't see this as an academic exercise. This is a, what's broke, and let's get it fixed and make it work, because this is what we have. We don't, unlike somebody that's in business, we can't go down to the truck store and say, sign me up for another one, and I'll put it on lease purchase or whatever. We don't have the authority to do that. We don't have the wherewithal to go out and buy a truck today, as somebody in business might do. So we need to take what we have, fix it, make it operational, and Jim, you've done a good job in the past of making it work, and so we gotta make it work through at least one more season.
I'm confident I can make it work.
Yeah.
I just need to do some welding on it and replace a little bit of metal.
Okay. I'll be glad to work with you on that.
Okay. Maybe we could review the truck together and
Sure. Class 6 road signs. Federal Corner Road, the sign that says no vehicles on Welland Road end.
Yep.
It's done. North Line Road, it's missing, or was it never put up?
that had a sign that said not a freeway right on it.
Okay. There's the square ones that you've used. Since I put this down to bring up, and I want to be honest, in the last 2 weeks, there's been 3 incidences of stupid people. Incident number 1, a friend of mine four-wheeling out where Holmberg's Road intersects with North Line Road. There's an elderly people from Sugar Hill reading their GPS, and how they ever got their vehicle into that intersection, he doesn't know.
Wow.
Totally frustrated, and this is a member of the...
That's Sandy Knoll Road.
Yep. What he said to me is, if they had ripped their gas tank out, how would they have gotten out? Couldn't open their doors. Okay. Since then, another person...
Wild Alaska up
Right.
there.
Yeah.
Since then, there was a box truck that got past that intersection.
Did they come up through Sandy Knoll? Way they must have.
No, they
can't get up
they
through
came in. They came in from North Line Road.
And they got to the intersection with,
They got beyond, that box truck got beyond the intersection with Sandy Knoll and was lost.
I can't imagine that.
Well,
you can't drive through there.
this is what the person told me.
Because
The third incident is, and I saw this personally when I was out checking, a person walking says this on Welland Road, there's a tractor trailer off the road. I went to the steep section there, a food truck, trailer truck, trying to get to the camp. And so I contacted the police, and the police officer allegedly asked him, why are you using GPS? Oh no, it's on my map. This is how I get to the camp. At that point I said, is it even worth putting these signs up, because you can't fix stupid?
Wow.
See my dilemma? On the other hand, what do? Put gates? Or put tape across?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have seen an incident before on Welland Road where there was a box truck stuck out there in the wintertime. And I talked with them. They didn't speak English.
Yep.
And the GPS was showing them to go that way.
Right. Well, the 2 buses that tore up 2 or 3 years ago beyond Terrace Pines, remember, they got
Yes.
$35,000 worth of damage. their GPS spoke French and they were
All
from
right.
Canada.
Here's what I'm gonna suggest. Jim, how about you and I work on location and wording on signs for the Class 6 roads?
Okay.
All right, so
Now, this is
there is I'm aware that there's standard language that's used on a lot of these signs that at the end of town maintenance on the road. I mean, it's, for instance, on Federal Corner, once you go to a certain point, I think you got a sign that says not a throughway or whatever. But when you get to the end of town maintenance, if we can put signs there, both sides of the road that says that.
Maintained.
Right, right. And I'll look up the wording, but it conveys more than just, it's not maintained as a through road. At any rate, it's a fairly standard sign. I think we do some of that. You're not gonna prevent everybody from doing it.
That's a good point.
But what you're gonna do is, for people that can read English, at least give them fair warning that the road surface is changing at this point going forward. So you're on a dirt road now, you get to these signs and as you see it changing, there's a reason for that, because we don't do anything beyond here. That's just
Need something that has a picture to show, but I don't know what that picture would be.
yeah.
There's another wrinkle. Caleb Pike of the fire department has done some research. There are two Google computer maps services. One doesn't talk to the other. I think he has reached, or he has a contact with one company, so you might want to check with them if they can update things. I mean, this goes even further. Clay Gallagher repeatedly leaves messages with the truck haulers, and they don't listen to their dispatchers, and 21 Sergeants Road, they go end up over in Ossipee at the Humane Society. It happens every month. And, I mean, what can he do?
Yeah.
Well,
I tear my hair out, but there's nothing left. You know?
there you go.
There's,
I think that.
and then I look at North Line Road, for instance, because I happen to have 2,000 feet of frontage on it. And why did we start the 911 numbering on Old Berlin? I mean, that just makes no sense to me at all.
No.
So if somebody's looking for 8 North Line Road,
Yeah.
you can't get there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And, so you got all these 800 numbers up on this, and I don't think so there's confusion all around
Exactly.
on those.
Well,
Yeah, the highest number is the intersection with Ledge Hill Road.
Yeah, it's the old down.
At 795. yeah.
Right.
Okay.
800 something.
Yep. Well, I beat that to death. Signs at the Melvin Village Fire Station. I went and propped up one of them again.
Okay, yeah, you and I were supposed to look at that.
Okay, I'll help you pound. Let's put in 2 regular posts and put the signs on them. Right now, they're delineator posts, and they just work their ways out of the ground. Right? It's not a signpost. It's a delineator post where someone stuck the signs on them years
Signs for
ago.
what?
Fire.
To prevent people from parking on the apron in front of the firehouse.
I'll work with you on that. Road grader bill. Did you see my note?
I did not.
Okay, I have a question on the Jordan equipment bills. The bill indicates this is for repairs to our grader. The town does not own a grader.
Yep, no, that was, it's like a cutting edge on a plow. It's the rear edge on the grader.
I've just never seen these before in my.
Yep, the town has bought one before for us, but
They were,
yeah, I mean, it was out, and it's just part of it.
And
Doesn't get used anywhere but for the town.
okay. Install swim lines. Normally that had to come out of your budget, and this year it didn't.
I'm not sure how that has worked in the past, to be honest with you.
Well, It ain't a road expense.
No, I
It's a
thought
Parks and Rec
Rec.
expense, so I'm not sure why there's a question about that. It shouldn't come out of the road budget, it should come out of Parks and Rec.
And we made that decision. Did you have a conversation with Gina about this this
No,
year or
she-
past years?
No, that's never come up before, so that's why I'm a little, I wasn't sure.
Well, you saw her note then.
I did.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Lloyd? Do you have anything for
Jim,
us?
thank you.
Jim, do you have anything for us beyond all the stuff we've been shooting at you? Huh? No?
What's that?
I say, do you have anything
Oh,
for us
no,
beyond
no,
that?
I'm good.
Okay,
All set. Yeah, thank you.
yeah, thanks, Jim.
Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
All right, get to the signature file. The first item is change order to our contract for the Sodom Road Bridge repairs. The original contract price was $67,000. And that included $20,000 for contingency that come up. So the contingency that we needed was not much. So the total, final total amount on the contract is $48,310. So that's a decrease of $18,640 from the contract price. And so.
Did you take a look at the work?
And I did.
I did, I was
Yeah,
very pleased.
I thought,
I didn't get underneath.
hmm?
Did you guys go underneath?
No, I didn't
No,
go that
no.
underneath, I just viewed it from the top. I also looked at all the progress reports along the way,
Yes.
and every facet of what they did seemed to be very workmanlike and organized, and like not only they knew what they were doing, but they cared what they were doing. So I need approval to sign off on this change order, reducing the contract amount by $18,690.
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Under discussion, would it be appropriate to have a representative company to come in and for us to ask them about future projects like Tuftonboro Neck Bridge, or do we wait until
Yeah, I think-
2025?
I think we're,
Put them up for bid.
yeah,
Because they're all different.
yeah,
And
we are, yeah, that one's a ways out.
Have we received their bill yet?
This is this is the payment application, so this is the request for payment, which I also need to sign, I guess.
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
When the check goes out, could you make sure a letter of thanks to the appropriate person gets sent?
Yeah.
All right. Letter of thanks to Sue Wingate for her service to the planning board.
I'll move to sign that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And this is a letter to the Hurlburt trustees regarding
Your appointment.
Right, they don't
Yeah,
answer
you-
their phones,
huh?
they don't send back emails, they
Yeah.
just
yeah.
playing the avoidance game.
Oh, it wasn't them, actually, the attorney.
Yeah.
Oh, wasn't
It was-
it?
It was another
So-
party. Yeah.
I move we send it.
All right. I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Selectmen's update. Lloyd?
Karen, have you received any job performance reviews?
No,
Okay, could you send the appropriate note out? They're several months overdue.
is that for the police department?
Yes. We just want to get this work done so it doesn't back us up during budget season. For political signs, I'd ask that the board make a statement that, just to remind potential candidates, please have permission of the landowners to put the signs out.
And no posting on public property. And Karen, I think you can bring that back to the front page on the website. You've done that before.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So just to remind folks as we get on toward or into the political season.
That's it.
Okay. Chip?
Just got a couple of welfare cases I'm going with, and making sure that the budget committee gets copies of the quarterly reports of revenue and expenses. Because we're not, our next budget meeting is not until October, but I think we might have a discussion about moving that up into September sometime.
Well, in September is when the board makes a decision about merit increases and cost of living. And it has worked well the last 2 years that you've been here. It gives us all an opportunity.
Our health plans again, I think.
Yep.
So we'll start that meeting today.
Okay.
Karen, could you go through the different committees? I think we have an opening on agriculture, an opening on planning board. We'd like to fill those positions.
Okay.
We do, planning board does not have any.
Zoning board,
Oh,
Sue Wingate, I'm sorry.
ZBA?
Yeah.
ZBA has an opening, okay, yeah. All right. All right, let's move on to correspondence. This is just a note from Karen about transition for fuel oil. The contract that we had with Carroll County ended on July 2nd, and our contract with Pemmy River for next year starts on September 1st. And Karen reached out, talked with Pemmy River, and they agreed to honor their price starting September 1st, effective today. So covering the gap in between.
And for what supply is that?
That's for fuel oil.
Fuel oil?
Right.
Because I have concern that people pointed out the gas means changing all their tanks.
We stayed
No,
with the same
no,
vendor.
We stayed with the same one.
Propane, we're staying with the same vendor, yep.
Not being-
There was no advantage to changing. Pricing is the same with both vendors. This was brought up at the last meeting with respect to a donation. You were gonna look into that situation as to whether she had any involvement, specific involvement with the town.
I will continue.
Okay, all right. This is revisit from last meeting, the question about pursuing a grant for the writing of a potential groundwater protection ordinance for the town of Tupperville. Susan Slack was here the last meeting, and we had some discussion at that time, and it fits with some of the other stuff that we were talking about. The investigation relative to the
Yeah.
area around the old
I mean, I
landfill.
see the aquifer maps that we got today, which is great. Steve Wingate's doing something with our watersheds as far as mapping those.
It's the Lakeland Sake Association is doing that.
So I'm wondering if putting together some ordinance is a little premature until we know what we're looking at. I mean,
I feel the
I
same
kind of
way.
hate these broad brush ordinances that
Feel
come
good.
out any number of ways.
Many of the things that are being suggested there, we're already doing incrementally. Well testing, groundwater testing, this study. We already have things about building driveways and roads for ground stormwater.
On the other side, I could think that perhaps having an aquifer protection ordinance might inure to our benefit when we start talking about Wolfboro's issues.
Yes.
But
All right.
Can we kind of table the
Yeah,
discussion?
we can certainly leave that one roll for a while longer. Let's see, I think you all have seen the field reports from HEB.
yeah.
Yep.
And I don't know that there's anything, the rest of this is all pretty perfunctory.
I didn't see anything to pull out.
Yep, some wetland permits.
I haven't heard much about the property tax on utilities. How's that going? Was there, I mean, we were miles and miles apart.
Yeah, and
I haven't seen anything come through from the,
There
from
was
our
a-
attorney on it.
There was a letter 3 weeks ago, or three meetings ago. The second or third round of appeals by one utility.
yeah.
And Chris Bolt's up on that. I sat down with Rod Wood and I said, I have some concerns. I saw some building going on, an enlargement and retraction of the facility below your house.
Right.
Some of the infrastructure on Transformer Hill has been totally removed. I also asked Rod about, there's probably about 50 sets of poles that one's broken and another one put in, and what is done with the other one. And he said that Chris Bolt is the one that assesses that. And when I last checked our town report, the utilities are our biggest taxpayer. They own about $14 million worth of property in town. And from Rod and from when I last spoke to Chris, there's nothing new on that, other than one electric company just went up 19% on its rate.
Well, having been subject to their pricing for putting in above ground power, I think they need to either charge one amount or accept one appraisal or assessment. I mean, their notion of value of their above ground lines is nowhere near, I mean, it's a tenth of what they're charging to put in an above ground line. Well, it costs that much to put an above ground line in. That's the value of the line. It's not, a tenth of that.
And what happened in the lawsuit is they lost on every point of the way the state has,
Yeah.
Mr. Dickman, the biggest issue was, and of course Bill Stockman is probably the guru on that, when they doubled the lines from Transformer Hill to Ossipee, and of course they go through the valley, and he goes, hey, wait a minute. I found out that the poles that were put in by REA in 1939 go across my dad's property. Every year, the utility was allowed to deduct 5% depreciation. So, within 20 years, from 1959 on, those are tax-free. Not only does it move their product, they now lease out 2 other lines and whatever. And the court was amazed at that.
With respect to anything, as I recall, relative to utilities in the town of Tuftonboro, every one of these actions or appeals has not gone toward in the utilities way. There, as I recall, there was there were some with respect to power generating plants that were partial toward the utilities approach. So I think we've been well served by our representatives.
Yes, they have.
In Sans Souci and Bolt in carrying this thing forward, and they're extremely conversant in the subject, and time and again have demonstrated in a BTLA and in a court setting that the simplified approach to valuation, which is every pole is worth a fixed amount of money. So if you want to know what the valuation is, then you just count up the number of poles and multiply it by whatever it is, and that's the value. You know, every single decision has come down saying that that's not a supportable rationale for utility valuation. That has to be have a relationship to the market value of the asset, just like your house has to have a relationship. So, and for utilities, part of the market value is the revenue that that it can generate. So
if you have one pole that's pulling at a $1,200 revenue,
a pole
versus a pole
in
versus
Manchester is gonna be worth more than a pole in Tuftonboro, because you generate a lot more revenue off of it.
right. That's the.
But there's a relationship between that component and taxability, and not just you know, it costs you X number of dollars to install a pole, and so that's what we're gonna. The hardware itself is not the value in the asset. Value is in.
Well, there's 2 ways to do. I mean, it was steeple gate versus Concord. There's 2 ways we can tax. One is the commercial value of the property, and the other is the actual assessed physical value of the property. If it's a commercial entity, you can actually take into account what's the revenue.
Exactly.
Picture.
Sure.
But, you know,
well, and if for instance I owned a bunch of transmission lines and I was going to sell those transmission lines, all right, the value is in
how much
is in what it does for me, not.
We do exactly the same thing with our taxes in Tuftonboro. Your property with a 2-bay garage and a boathouse on the body of water is worth more than my same size house with the same amount of square acreage in a barn. Because it's
that's
all
market value.
Because it's all driven by market value.
All right. Do we have any other business?
I forgot to mention, Karen's working on the census.
Yep.
And in the absence of anyone coming in and, you know, we put the ad in the paper, we're getting to the season where it's going to be busy for budgets and whatnot. Can we, with permission from maybe you as chairman, these people, Diane and Karen, there may be an instance where they really need to work on a project where they have to sequester themselves, and can they go beyond the 35 hours on a specified?
I think that's always an option that's available.
Can we as a board kind of extend it to them? They strike me as two individuals that aren't going to be taking advantage of it, but I want them to be successful too, so they're valuable.
Well, I thought, didn't we address that in comp time at one point in our
That was part of it.
very past?
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know how else, what would be your suggestion about a difference?
Well, for example, there's money in the budget for the two, I'm gonna call them ad hoc secretaries. And if they said, she said, look, I need 4 hours outside of my work, not outside physically, but outside of my 35 hours to finish this project and do it correctly, would you, if I need it, use up to 4 hours in a week? And that's where I'm coming from. We have the money in the budget, we have these projects.
So in addition to saying, okay, I need 4 more hours this week to finish this project, I'm gonna take 4 hours off next week, compensate for it. You're saying, no, we're gonna pay you 39 hours this week and you're gonna work 32.
I say that we have both options on the table.
Okay.
That we at least try it.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, no problem there. And I don't think there's been, I'm not aware that there's been an issue in the past where when that sort of thing has come up that it hasn't been available. So, all right.
We have to do public input.
Well, no, we did that at the beginning. Do you have any questions for us before we?
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Oh, that fellow disappeared.
He was waiting for that.
Oh, okay.
Hold on, sir.
So you tabled any decisions on the Stantec presentation,
Mhm.
but you talked about where you left it was the first 3 steps were what you were considering as the beginning. You weren't even considering the other at this point.
Well, we're considering the whole thing, but what we're not, I mean, my suggestion was we can probably find $7,000 in our budget this year to do some of this, but I don't think we're gonna find $25,000. So it was to break the procedure up a little bit so that we're doing the drilling with next year's warrant article.
So to summarize, just to be clear for people, you want feedback or whatever.
Yeah.
You have these 5 steps. They're budgetary concerns. So if anything gets done, it probably would be the first 3.
But I'd like to clarify. Step 1 is, let's have the information on the sample that was already taken. That's step 1.
Yeah.
Step 2 is incrementally go into the program of extensive testing. Does that make sense?
Well, hydrogeologic reconnaissance.
Right. They need to find a place where they're gonna drill.
Yes.
Right.
And they need to do that electromagnetic.
Yes.
And the third one is the electromagnetic terrain anomaly mapping.
Right.
Yeah, come up with an acronym for that.
This is Stantec 101, right? Okay. Anyway, you will be discussing it further.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to comment on the groundwater grants. I believe that Susan Slack said most of the other towns have these. Tufton Borough does not yet, and they wanted to catch up. And it was different from a watershed plan, because it was more of the surface. It has to do with businesses, auto repair.
I thought she was gonna send us an example, or did she give us an example?
She gave us an
She
example.
gave you an example. So there is a lot going on, but I just see it as a different thing, and it's more of a base elements. It's not like a big investigation. It's just,
And it's not something we can do anyway, we'd have to put that before the town.
Right.
We'd have to bring
oh, I
it
thought it
up.
was free.
No, if we're gonna change some regulation and enact.
Right,
So
so
if
that
we were-
wouldn't be till next,
That
so
wouldn't
what
be
she's
till
talking
next
about
year.
is, you get the grant money, hopefully in the fall, then you start working on it, and it's not till 2019 that anything would come up for discussion, but, so I don't know if you're gonna put it off for another year. Yeah. I just thought she was pretty clear that it was different, so.
I'll reread that example.
Sure, I'll reread.
Put that on for next week.
Lots of science in between.
I'm not good at science.
No.
Okay,
Question.
yes, Joe?
In reference to the signs, so people don't drive down the roads and get stuck.
Yep.
I've been here since 2002, and I remember exploring the town. And I would take my truck and I would go down some of these roads. One of them was the county road coming into Sodom. And that was a cow path literally coming down. I couldn't believe it. You know, I came down there in my truck. Over a period of time, it has been graded. By whom, I don't know, so that it is passable. It used to have big, deep ruts. So if I understand it correctly, that's still a class 6 road, is that correct?
No.
It's class 5 now?
During one of the first few years that I was in town, which, let's say it was 2008, 2009, 2010, something like that, it was reclassified as a class 5 seasonal. It's an article in the warrant, voted on at town meeting, and so it then got upgraded from class 6 back to a seasonal class 5.
What's going to happen to North Line Road, Willard Road,
Willand.
Willand Road? Are they ever gonna be cleared or?
Absolutely,
the-
North Line Road's gonna be made into a road next year's budget, I think. We're gonna bring the budget.
There are some,
The vehicle for taking a class 6 road and turning it back into a normal or class 5 road is town meeting. A vote of town meeting can re-embrace, if you will, a class 6 road.
well, we know on.
In my view, the mechanism that happens is that somebody makes a case for it, and maybe the case is a petition article for the warrant. So if somebody wants that road turned back into a class 5 road, you get it put on the warrant and you vote on it. And there are things to recommend it and things not to recommend against it. I mean, the whole mechanism of abandoning maintenance on a road, taking a class 5 or town road and turning it into an unmaintained road or class 6 is because the town has determined that it doesn't make sense to maintain it anymore. It's a road that people used to use a lot. Maybe there were a bunch of farms, maybe it was the route to go to the next town, whatever it is, and it's not used so much anymore. And maybe it's not used at all, but by law, if it's a town road, a class 5 road, the town has to maintain it. So if you have a town road that you don't want to maintain anymore, town meeting has to vote and say, we don't want to maintain it.
What if it's impossible to use anymore, literally?
Doesn't matter.
Well, it's
still a class 6 road.
A class 6 road is, once it's a road, forever it's a road, okay? So it's still there. So if I'm down at the end of a maintained road and I'm on a class 6 road, I can't build my big mansion right across the road because the road belongs to the town.
Is the town responsible?
The town has no responsibility for maintenance.
responsibility.
That's correct.
Okay.
And with permission, private individuals can do maintenance work on the road with permission of the town.
Well, they can also oppose it too.
I'm sorry?
They can also oppose it also.
The town can oppose something?
No, the individual can, one individual will step up and may oppose it as far as they don't want anything done to the road.
You mean power of veto?
No.
No, no.
If the landowner on a class 6 road wants to do some work on that road,
Right,
just has to ask the
Has to
selectmen.
come to the selectmen.
And,
Right.
and a
And-
private
and-
citizen does not have any
Right.
say in that.
Right, now, right, another neighbor might come to the board and say, well, I don't want this guy to maintain it, but he doesn't have any veto power over it.
okay, all right.
You can run for selectmen, and then it's good to do.
Right,
We have a couple of roads in town where private citizens do some maintenance.
I was just asking the question, like I
Yeah.
said, it just changed over a period
You
of
know,
time.
a local example of a road coming out of class 6 status is Tronic Track Road. That was a class 6 road
Yes.
forever.
Yep.
no,
And it only came out, what, 15, 20 years ago?
In the late 80s, right?
Late 80s.
I didn't know that, yeah.
no.
So that was closed in the wintertime.
We don't have many roads in town like that. Only a couple off the top of my head.
Uh,
Even Lang Pond, we're now,
Well, it's a seasonal,
it's a
okay,
seasonal
right, right.
road.
So, Sandy Knoll is a class 6.
Yeah.
North Line, a section beyond the end of maintenance is a class 6.
Federal
Land
Corner.
Road is a class 6. Canaan Road beyond,
Camp?
No.
Marrow
no.
Marrow Vista is a
No,
class
I don't
6.
think that is, if you look at it, if you look at
That's
the
still
records.
in litigation.
I think it's still a class 5.
So-
We don't maintain it
All right.
past where. the-
Sandy Knoll Road runs into North Line Road?
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh, it
there's a right
does?
of way.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And you're not
Don't
even,
try driving through there. though.
It's difficult.
and you're not even talking, Joe, about the range roads. Burley Road is a range road, but it continues. The road that goes into Shirley Way, that road is built in a range way.
Okay, I was just curious, thank you.
Yeah. And one thing I will mention on class 6 roads that seems to be a common misunderstanding is you will often see them referred to as subject to gates and bars, which means that you can put a gate across it. For instance, to keep cattle from running across the roads. But those gates cannot be locked, all right? The gates and bars that are allowed there are only to improve public safety, not to prevent access.
So that's per order of the town, not an
That's
individual.
by state
By state
statute, right?
Okay. All right,
So,
thank you.
and you will find class 6 roads that have padlocks on them
Yeah.
in violation of state law,
Yes.
but that's what it is. All right.
Dr. No, that's a secret
Any,
level.
You just bring your cutter with you.
yep. Any additional
I'm good.
questions,
I'll
business?
make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
you're saying try?